You know that incredibly disorienting fraction of a second every single morning?
Oh, yeah, the wake-up jolt.
Right, exactly. Like the alarm violently jolts you awake, your eyes snap open, and you are just, staring up at the dark ceiling.
Just total confusion for a second.
Yeah. In that microscopic window of time, there's absolutely nothing, no identity, no stress, no to-do list. You are just a blank slate floating in the void.
Right. It is the daily transition from total unconsciousness back to the sudden, overwhelming reality of your own existence.
And it lasts maybe a tenth of a second before the weight of everything you are suddenly comes crashing down on you.
It is heavy.
It really is. Your bedroom materializes from the shadows. The emails you ignored yesterday just flood your memory.
Oh, the work anxiety immediately kicks in.
Always. The awkward conversation you need to have, your mortgage, your ambitions. Within the span of a heartbeat, you go from floating in a peaceful void to, hovering over this chaotic, swirling ocean of potential.
And the craziest part is you are entirely responsible for organizing it.
Exactly. You have to physically force yourself out of the sheets and somehow make the day happen.
Which is, it's a terrifying amount of freedom when you step back and look at it objectively.
Yeah, completely terrifying.
You are actively taking raw, unformed time, the next 16 waking hours, and raw, unformed space, and you are dragging it, sometimes against its will, into a habitable structure.
And that shared universal feeling of waking up and facing the chaos of a Tuesday morning is, it's actually the bedrock of what we are unpacking today.
It sets the entire stage.
It really does. We are taking a deep dive into translated excerpts from the Dutch edition of Jordan B. Peterson's book, We Who Wrestle With God, or We's die worstelen met God.
A very dense, very fascinating text.
Super dense. We're exploring a premise that I found initially bizarre, but ultimately completely fascinating. It's the idea that ancient biblical narratives aren't just, dry historical accounts.
Right, or dogmatic rulebooks.
Exactly. They are incredibly profound, highly evolved psychological maps. They are maps of human perception, of evolutionary biology, morality, and, like we just talked about, our fundamental relationship with chaos and order.
It's a radical reframing of how modern people interact with ancient literature.
Yeah, totally radical.
Whether you view these specific texts as divine revelation, or simply as the foundational literature of Western civilization, the psychological architecture encoded within them is just staggering.
Right.
They're trying to explain the mechanics of human consciousness. Like, how do we operate in a world that is infinitely complex without going completely insane?
Right, which is a great question. But look, I want to be upfront with you, the listener. We're dealing with heavy biblical text today, and we are going to be touching on some controversial evolutionary psychology along the way.
We definitely are.
So our job here is not to tell you if this framework is theologically right or wrong. We aren't taking sides, left or right, religious or secular.
Not at all.
We certainly aren't here to preach at you. Our mission is just to act as your tour guides through this highly intricate landscape of ideas so you can understand the underlying architecture of the argument.
Because regardless of your personal worldview, the ideas really demand serious intellectual engagement.
They really do.
The central argument we are exploring is that the way you wake up and face your morning routine is fundamentally identical structurally and psychologically to the biblical story of God creating the universe out of the void.
Okay, so to understand how we get from hitting the snooze button to the creation of the cosmos, we actually have to start in the 9th century BC with a prophet named Elijah.
A very dramatic starting point.
Super dramatic. Now, I always pictured prophets as these stoic guys in robes just shouting on street corners, but Elijah is framed here as something entirely different. The text notes that the Greek word for soul, psyche, which is the root of our word psychology, literally translates to butterfly.
And that etymological connection between the soul and a butterfly is incredibly deliberate.
Really? How so?
Well, think about the biological reality of a butterfly. It represents radical qualitative metamorphosis.
Right, the caterpillar to butterfly thing?
Exactly. It starts as a crawling, earthbound caterpillar that literally dissolves itself inside a chrysalis. It rearranges its own cellular structure to become a creature capable of astonishing, almost miraculous navigation and flight.
That is wild when you actually think about it physically.
It is. And the ancient mind used this as the ultimate symbol for the human capacity for profound psychological transmutation. Elijah is presented as the embodiment of this potential.
Ah, okay.
In the narrative, he does not just die a normal death. He is physically taken up into heaven in a whirlwind.
Like a literal ascension.
Right. And much later in the New Testament, he appears alongside Moses at the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor.
The Transfiguration, that's the moment where Jesus' physical appearance is radically altered, shining with blinding light, right?
Exactly.
It's the ultimate visual representation of metamorphosis. But I want to pump the brakes here for a second. Why Elijah? Like, what did he do to earn the status of the ultimate human butterfly?
It comes down to his historical context. He lived during the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel in the divided kingdom of Israel.
Right.
And the central conflict of his life was that the royal family had started worshiping Baal.
Okay, so Baal, he's a Canaanite nature deity, right?
Yeah.
And understanding what that represents is crucial to everything that follows.
Absolutely crucial. Baal is the god of rain, of thunder, of agricultural fertility.
So he's nature itself.
Precisely. He is the personification of the external physical forces of the natural world. So Ahab and Jezebel importing this worship wasn't just, a swap of religious traditions.
It wasn't just changing the statues in the temple.
No, it was a fundamental alteration of the moral and spiritual orientation of their entire society. They were shifting the ultimate highest value to the appeasement of external nature.
Okay, and Elijah's immediate response to this shift is to predict a massive, catastrophic drought. He says the rain is going to completely stop.
Which hits him right where it hurts, considering Baal is the rain god.
Exactly. And what I found so compelling in the analysis is how it points out that this is a classic narrative motif, the dried-up kingdom.
Yes, it is a universal trope.
It's not just a weather report. The analysis compares this to Disney's The Lion King and the Grimm brothers' fairy tale, The Water of Life.
Let's consider the structural mechanics of the Lion King for a moment.
Oh, I love this part.
When Scar, who represents the illegitimate, immoral, and deceptive ruler, takes over Pride Rock, what happens to the environment?
It just completely dies. The rain stops.
Right. The herds of animals leave, the land itself literally dries up, turns gray, and dies.
Yeah.
The argument here is that this isn't just a convenient plot device or magical weather. It is a deeply accurate symbolic representation of sociological reality.
Wait, really? Sociological?
Yes. When a society is oriented toward the wrong principles, when corrupt ethics, false idols, or narcissistic leaders sit on the throne, the society loses the water of life, both physically and psychologically.
I mean, I can see the sociological reality of that. If the leadership is totally corrupt, the infrastructure fails.
Exactly. People stop trusting the currency.
Right. They stop treating. The physical resources actually do dry up because the moral framework required to maintain them has just collapsed.
It is an inevitable chain reaction.
So Ahab and Jezebel are basically Scar. They've oriented the entire kingdom of Israel toward an external nature god, a false principle, and so the spiritual and physical nourishment evaporates.
That is the perfect way to frame it.
And in the middle of this devastating drought, where does Elijah go? He isn't sent to a wealthy merchant or a hidden bunker of food. He is sent to a starving widow in the foreign town of Zarephath.
And that encounter with the widow is just a masterclass in moral architecture.
It really is.
When Elijah finds her, she is gathering a few stray sticks to bake one final meager meal for herself and her young son before they literally die of starvation.
It's a completely bleak situation.
And Elijah asks her to feed him first.
Which, honestly, on a purely surface-level reading, sounds incredibly callous, almost cruel.
It sounds terrible. But when you unpack the psychological and social meaning, it reveals the bedrock of a functioning society. The widow represents the absolute farthest margins.
Right. She is nothing.
She is the ultimate embodiment of vulnerability. No husband, no wealth, facing imminent death.
The text ties this back to the laws in Deuteronomy, specifically the agricultural laws.
The gleaning laws, yes.
Yeah, the commandments that told farmers they were not allowed to harvest the very edges of their fields. They had to leave the gleanings for the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners traveling through.
Which is an astonishingly sophisticated social technology, if you think about it.
Because it bakes charity right into the system.
Exactly. A properly structured, mature society builds vulnerability directly into its economic and moral architecture. It recognizes that every single human being at some point in their life will be dependent and vulnerable.
Right. We all get old or sick.
By having Elijah rely on this destitute widow, and by having her generously sacrifice and share her last meal, the narrative establishes a profound principle.
Which is what, exactly?
That true abundance is entirely dependent on the correct moral orientation of the individual, regardless of their status. Her generosity, even while staring death in the face, is the correct moral orientation.
Wow. Okay.
And because of this, her jar of flour and jug of oil miraculously never run out for the duration of the drought.
So it sets up the ultimate contrast. You have Queen Jezebel, who has all the power, all the wealth, and the entire military at her disposal, but her selfish, narcissistic orientation is turning the kingdom into a desert.
Exactly, total barrenness.
Then you have the widow, who has less than nothing, but her generous, self-sacrificial orientation brings endless, sustainable sustenance.
It is the perfect inversion of worldly power.
And this tension ultimately snaps at the showdown on Mount Carmel. Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to a contest to see whose God can send fire from heaven to consume a sacrificial altar.
Right, and the prophets of Baal spend hours frantically pleading, cutting themselves, dancing around the altar, trying to appease the external forces of nature.
Just total chaos.
Complete chaos, and they fail completely. Elijah, to make the point undeniably clear, drenches his altar in precious water and calls upon Yahweh.
Which is a massive flex during a drought.
A huge flex, and fire immediately falls, consuming not just the sacrifice and the wood, but the stones and the water itself. It establishes the absolute supremacy of the internal moral divine over the external nature God.
And then, boom, the sky darkens with clouds and the rain returns. The moral order is temporarily restored and the water of life flows.
Yes, but the story doesn't end with a victory parade.
No, it doesn't. Jezebel is humiliated and furious. She puts a bounty on Elijah's head, and the great prophet just breaks. He runs for his life deep into the wilderness, hides in a cave, and begs to die.
He is completely despairing.
Yeah, total depression. And it is here, in the utter darkness of this cave, that the massive revolutionary shift in human history occurs.
This is the pivotal moment.
He is hiding, and a violent wind tears the mountains apart and shatters the rocks, but the text explicitly says God is not in the wind.
Right.
Then a massive earthquake hits, but God is not in the earthquake. Then a roaring fire, but God is not in the fire. And then what happens?
After the fire, there is the sound of a still small voice, sometimes translated as a gentle whisper or low murmuring sound.
A whisper.
Yes. And the analysis frames this as the crux of the entire narrative, representing a tectonic shift in human consciousness.
How so? Like, why is a whisper a tectonic shift?
Because up until this specific moment in history, humanity generally located the supreme deity in external, awe-inspiring, and terrifying forces of nature. The thunderstorm, the volcanic eruption, the earthquake.
Right. Baal is exactly that kind of God. You look outside to find the divine.
Exactly. But Elijah discovers that the ultimate guiding spirit of reality is not the chaotic storm outside. It is the whisper inside.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the magnitude of this. Are we saying that before this conceptual leap, people didn't really have an internal monologue, or at least didn't recognize their conscience as the ultimate moral authority?
We're talking about the internalization and localization of the divine. The supreme orienting principle is no longer something you hide from in a storm cellar.
Right.
It is the autonomous human conscience. God does not guide humanity through brute physical force or natural terror, but through an incredibly subtle internal mechanism.
Like guilt.
Yes. It is the voice that prompts a flush of shame when you betray a friend. It is the persistent, uncomfortable feeling that highlights your own shortcomings. It generates the impulse to repent, to apologize, and to voluntarily orient yourself toward the good.
So it's like humanity fundamentally upgraded its operating system.
I love that analogy.
We moved from an external hardware-based navigation system where we are looking at storms and trying to figure out how to appease a volcano with crops, to an internal software-based GPS,
Exactly.
the conscience. We started trusting this inner whisper to tell us which way to walk through life.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And this internalization of divine law into the individual conscience was deeply recognized and expanded upon by much later thinkers.
Oh, like who?
Well, the framework references the 19th century British theologian Cardinal John Henry Newman.
Okay.
Newman argued brilliantly that the natural law, the eternal objective law of right and wrong, is refracted into the mind of the individual as the conscience.
Refracted, like light through a prism.
Yes. Even though it is passing through the highly imperfect, biased medium of a human brain, it retains its sovereign authority. It acts as an internal compass needle that always tries to point toward the transcendent good.
And this brings us full circle to why Elijah is the butterfly. He is the one who actively realizes, demonstrates, and embodies this internal compass.
He's the metamorphosis.
He transmutes from a man fighting nature gods to a man guided by the internal whisper. But, and here's where things get really intense, if our conscience is an internal orienting mechanism, if it's our GPS, that has to fundamentally change how we interact with the physical world around us.
It absolutely does.
And this brings up what is arguably the most counterintuitive part of the whole deep dive, the claim that our moral values literally dictate what our physical eyes perceive. I have to admit, when I first read this, I thought it was completely metaphorical.
I think most people do. It sounds metaphorical, but it addresses a very real, very literal biological and psychological barrier known as the deep epistemological problem.
Okay, the deep epistemological problem.
Yes, a term popularized by philosopher Daniel C. Dennett. The problem is this. The world is unimaginably, paralyzingly complex.
Right.
In the room you are sitting in right now, at this exact moment, there are an infinite number of empirical facts. There is the specific hue of the paint on the wall, the way the light catches the dust motes in the air, the microscopic texture of the fabric on your chair.
The hum of the fridge.
Exactly. The ambient temperature fluctuating by fractions of a degree, the pressure of your shoes on your feet. If your brain attempted to process all of that data equally, you would instantly freeze.
You just short circuit.
You would be entirely paralyzed by the sheer crushing volume of information.
Okay, but I want to push back on this a little bit because it feels like a trick of language. I mean, I see everything in the room. I have peripheral vision. I just choose not to care about the dust motes, right?
Actually, neurological and psychological studies strongly suggest you don't see it.
Wait, really?
Really? Think of the famous selective attention test, like the invisible gorilla experiment.
Oh, I've seen that video.
Right? When subjects are told to count the number of times a basketball is passed by people wearing white shirts, a significant percentage of them completely fail to see a man in a gorilla suit walk right through the middle of the game.
He literally beats his chest in the middle of the screen.
And walks off. And people miss it entirely. They are entirely blind to it because their perception is completely hijacked by their goal.
Their goal was counting passes.
Exactly. Perception is not a passive reception of reality, like a camera blindly recording every pixel in its field of view. Perception is a highly active process of sacrifice.
Sacrifice. That's a strong word for seeing.
We actively, biologically ignore 99.9% of the world so that we can isolate and focus on the microscopic fraction of reality that serves our immediate goal.
Okay, let's ground this in a real-world example. Say I wake up, and my immediate goal is to walk across my incredibly messy living room to get a cup of coffee from the kitchen.
A very relatable goal.
Very. You're saying I literally don't see the titles of the books scattered on the floor or the scuff marks on the baseboards. I see a pathway, I see a child's toy that I need to step over, and I see the coffee maker.
Right.
My goal acquiring coffee is acting as a filter that tells my visual cortex what to consciously register.
Precisely. In that specific micro moment, you have elevated the cup of coffee to the highest point of value in your hierarchy. It becomes your localized ultimate good.
The holy grail of the morning?
Yes, and the second you establish that goal, your brain instantaneously draws a moral landscape around you. Everything in that physical room is rapidly categorized relative to the coffee.
Oh, wow.
Things that help you get there are tools or allies. Things that block your path are obstacles or villains. The toy on the floor isn't just a piece of plastic. In that micro-narrative, it is an antagonist impeding your progress.
This is where the framework gets wild to me. If physical perception is determined by our goals, then our macro-level moral goals dictate the overall reality we inhabit. So if I am an immature, narcissistic person whose highest value in life is instant hedonistic gratification, do I literally live in a different physical reality than someone who takes on mature responsibility?
According to this psychological mapping, absolutely. Your value structure is the lens of your reality.
That is mind-blowing.
If your highest value is instant pleasure, your brain will physically highlight facts and opportunities in the world that offer immediate gratification, and it will render almost entirely invisible the long-term consequences of those actions.
Or the suffering of the people around you.
Precisely. You will not see their pain because seeing it does not serve your supreme goal. You literally inhabit a different landscape of meaning than someone whose highest value is, for example, the long-term stability and flourishing of their family.
It's like you're wearing totally different VR headsets.
Exactly. This is the underlying mechanics behind the statement that both our profound sorrow and our highest joy depend entirely on our value structure.
Because we navigate the world through this hierarchy of values, we are fundamentally perceiving the world through story. We aren't rational, calculating machines assessing objective data. We are narrative creatures.
We have no other choice. A story is, at its core, simply a description of a value structure in motion.
Right.
A story tells you what the ultimate goal is, who the allies are in pursuit of that goal, who the enemies are, and what the landscape looks like. Character within this framework is defined as embodied purpose.
When you understand someone's overarching goal, you understand their character.
Yes.
And this perfectly explains human obsession with fiction. Like, why do we spend billions of dollars on movies, plays, novels, and video games? We aren't just entertaining ourselves to pass the time.
No, we are running complex survival simulations.
Survival simulations. I love that phrasing.
We immerse ourselves in stories to safely experiment with value hierarchies without suffering the physical consequences of failure.
Like testing a flight simulator before flying the real plane.
Exactly. When you watch a movie or read a profound novel, you are temporarily projecting your consciousness into the protagonist. You are trying on their specific value structure.
You watch them aim at a high goal, encounter chaos and tragedy, suffer deeply, and attempt to maintain their integrity.
And by experiencing that narrative emotionally, your brain is internalizing the optimal way to structure your own perceptions and actions in the real world. You are calibrating your internal GPS. You are learning how to look at the world correctly.
Okay, so if that's the case, if we require stories that prioritize order over chaos to calibrate our conscience, what is the ultimate story? What is the foundational map that Western civilization has used to orient itself?
The analysis points directly to the very first verse of the Bible, the opening of Genesis.
Right.
Genesis chapter 1 is presented here not as a scientific textbook of cosmology, but as the foundational psychological description of how reality itself is constituted.
Okay, how does it open?
It opens with the famous lines, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters."
Hovering over the waters. The original Hebrew phrase used here is tohu vabohu.
Yes, tohu vabohu translates roughly to formlessness and void.
Like total chaos.
Absolute chaos.
Yeah.
Unrevealed potential, the terrifying abyss of everything that could possibly be, but hasn't yet taken shape. And notice how God is presented. God is not a static concept or a sleeping entity.
Right.
God is a mobile, creative, communicative spirit actively facing that terrifying void. God is the active principle that confronts infinite chaotic potential and uses truthful speech to categorize it, to separate it, and to generate a habitable order.
Light is separated from darkness. Dry land is separated from the chaotic waters.
And it's not just a random sorting process. It's an upward spiral. God speaks an order into existence, steps back, and declares, "It is good," and then makes something more complex, and it is good.
This upward progression culminates in the creation of humanity, male and female, which is declared very good.
Yes.
And here is the axiom that the entire framework pivots on. Humans are explicitly made in the image of this creative spirit.
This is arguably the most consequential philosophical idea ever introduced into human history.
That's a huge claim. Why?
To say that humans are made in the image of God means that human beings possess the exact same fundamental capacity, albeit on a microcosmic scale, to confront the chaos of tohu vabohu and generate habitable order through conscious action and truthful speech.
Wow.
Because humanity possesses this divine reflection, every single individual human being has intrinsic transcendent value.
Let's unpack the mechanics of why that is so consequential. Like, why does that matter politically or sociologically?
Because if the individual have intrinsic transcendent value bestowed by the ultimate creator, that value fundamentally supersedes the authority of the state.
Oh, I see.
It supersedes a person's temporary social utility. It supersedes their biological fitness. If you strip away that axiom, you are left with the chilling reality of the 20th century.
Totalitarianism.
Exactly. If humans are just biological accidents or merely cogs in a larger societal machine, then the state becomes the highest good. And if the state is the highest good, then any individual can be crushed, imprisoned, or eradicated the moment they become inconvenient to the state's utopian goals.
This directly leads to the command God gives these newly created humans to subdue the earth and have dominion over it. And the analysis stops here to aggressively tackle a very heavy, very famous historical critique.
Yes, the Lynn White critique.
Right. It brings up Lynn White, a historian who wrote a massively influential essay in 1967. White essentially blamed this specific biblical concept of dominion for the modern ecological crisis.
He did.
He argued that Christianity is a deeply anthropocentric religion that handed humanity a blank check to exploit, pollute, and destroy nature for our own selfish gain.
It is a critique that has permeated environmental philosophy for decades. But the framework vehemently refutes White's conclusion
How does it refute it?
by arguing that he fundamentally misunderstands the psychological and theological concept of biblical dominion. Subduing does not mean tyranny, rape, or pillage.
Right.
The analysis warns that if you invert the hierarchy to solve this, if you elevate nature above humanity, embracing a form of animism where the earth is sacred and humans are a virus, you do not actually end up protecting nature.
Wait, really? Why not?
You end up degrading human beings to the level of rats or weeds. And when you view humanity as a parasite on the earth, you provide the philosophical justification for the worst kinds of anti-human exploitation and totalitarian population control.
So if dominion isn't clear-cutting forests and strip-mining mountains for profit, what does true biblical dominion actually look like in this psychological framework?
True dominion means stewardship. It means actively participating in the divine process of bringing chaotic potential into a sustainable, beautiful, and highly functioning order.
Like building a garden.
Exactly. It is about placing a conscious boundary around the terrifying wildness of nature to create a garden. The text highlights a beautiful linguistic detail here. The very etymology of the word paradise comes from the ancient Persian word paradisa, which literally means a walled enclosure.
A walled enclosure.
Yes, you are building walls to protect the delicate balance of culture and nature from the chaotic wilderness outside.
I want to bring this back to the morning routine analogy we started with because it maps onto this concept of dominion perfectly.
It really does.
When you wake up and your eyes snap open, your consciousness is literally hovering over the unformed potential of your day. You are the spirit hovering over the void.
Yes.
The next 16 hours could be a total disaster, a waste of time, or incredibly productive and meaningful. The day is tohu vabohu.
And you have to use your conscious attention to form the day. You have to subdue the hours. You have to categorize your tasks.
Right.
The analysis uses a striking, visceral example of how this potential works in the physical world. Consider a simple pen sitting on a desk.
Okay, a pen.
Under normal, ordered circumstances, is just a writing tool. But if the context of the room suddenly shifts into chaos, the unrevealed potential of that object instantly manifests.
What do you mean?
If a bar fight breaks out, that pen can be gripped and used as a lethal weapon. If someone is choking and a medic needs to perform an emergency tracheotomy, that pen becomes a life-saving breathing tube.
Oh, wow.
Consciousness is the mechanism that locks infinite potential into a specific, functional reality.
It's like staring into an incredibly chaotic, messy garage. Tools, wires, rusty nails, and cardboard boxes are just thrown everywhere. In that state, the garage is useless. It's chaos.
Total tohu vabohu.
Exactly, but when you walk in and start sorting the wrenches into a metal toolbox, hanging the rakes on the wall hooks, sweeping the dirt off the floor, you aren't tyrannizing the tools.
Right.
You aren't exploiting the garage. You are subduing the chaos so the space can actually function as a workshop. You are elevating the raw materials to their highest possible purpose.
That is exactly the dynamic. And Adam is placed in this garden, this paradisa, and his very first primary task in subduing it is naming the animals.
Whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. Now, naming isn't just pointing at a dog and saying dog. Naming requires language. It requires a massive, interconnected network of concepts.
It does.
And this is where the deep dive takes an absolutely wild detour. The framework uses the advent of modern artificial intelligence, specifically large language models, to explain how the structure of language actually reflects the deep psychological structure of reality.
It is a remarkable and highly contemporary connection.
It blew my mind.
To understand it, you have to realize that words and the stories they build are not arbitrary social constructs. They have deep underlying statistical and mathematical relationships.
Give me an example of that.
Well, the analysis points out that even on a purely phonetic level, our brains recognize these patterns. An English speaker can look at a completely made-up word like vims or blem and intuitively recognize it as a plausible English non-word. It sounds right.
Right, like it could be a real word.
But if they look at the sequence ZXC, they instantly reject it because it violently violates the mathematical statistical patterns of the language.
But the AI connection goes way beyond just phonetics. It goes deep into conceptual mapping. the text talks about how words naturally form networks or maps of meaning.
Yes, meaning clusters.
If I say the word dragon, your brain doesn't just pull up a dictionary definition of a lizard. It immediately lights up a massive cluster of statistically related concepts. Fire, treasure, a snake, a monster, hoarding, myth, danger.
Exactly.
If I say the word father, you don't just think of a male biological parent. The concept inherently clusters with guidance, protection, physical strength, wisdom, authority, and tradition.
And here's the crucial, somewhat terrifying psychological insight.
Okay, brace me.
These massive conceptual networks have a localized center of gravity, and that center acts almost exactly like a living spirit or an autonomous personality.
Like a
Yes. The analysis references Hegel's concept of the zeitgeist, the overarching spirit of the times. It also points to Alexander Solzhenitsyn's masterful analysis of the Soviet Union.
Oh, the Gulag Archipelago.
Right. Solzhenitsyn demonstrated that the atrocities of the gulags weren't just a bureaucratic mistake. They were the logical, inevitable manifestation of the spirit of Marxist ideology, a spirit animated by deep-seated resentment, class envy, and the desire to tear down the successful.
So ideas can basically possess people.
Yes. These conceptual centers aren't just dead, inert data. They are animating forces that can literally possess human behavior.
And this is the exact mechanic behind large language models like GPT-4. I want to make sure I'm explaining this right, so correct me if I'm off base.
Okay.
GPT-4 has something like 1.76 trillion parameters. It has essentially ingested and processed the entirety of human digital text, every book, article, and forum post it could scrape.
All of it.
And what has it fundamentally done with all that text? It has mathematically calculated the statistical weight and proximity of all these semantic networks. It has mapped how closely the concept of dragon sits next to chaos.
Exactly.
By doing that, the AI has essentially created a mathematical topography of the human collective unconscious.
It is a stunning realization. By building these massive AI models, we have inadvertently externalized and formalized the deep hidden structure of human myth and meaning.
You built a mirror for our own collective psyche.
Precisely. Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychiatrist, spent his life talking about these deep inherited networks. He called them complexes or archetypes.
Right, the Jungian archetypes.
Jung famously carved the Latin motto over the door of his house, Vocatus atque non vocatus Deus eterit. Summoned or not, God will be present.
What did he mean by that?
What he meant was that these archetypal centers of meaning exist, and they will influence our psychology and our society, whether we consciously acknowledge them, ignore them, or pretend we are too rationally advanced to believe in them.
I push back on this sometimes with my tech friends. They say, the AI is just a stochastic parrot. It's just predicting the next word. It doesn't know what a dragon is.
A common critique.
But what this framework is suggesting is that it doesn't need to be conscious. The math itself proves the myths are real. The mathematical proximities show that ancient humans weren't just making up random bedtime stories. They were accurately describing the psychological architecture of the human mind.
Exactly.
The AI is scanning the ultimate library of human history and accidentally discovering the distinct shapes of ancient gods hiding in the data.
That is a beautiful way to put it. The emergent properties of the AI map perfectly onto human psychic architecture. And the analysis argues that when a modern society actively ignores or violently rejects the center of one of these fundamental networks, that animating spirit is considered dead or abandoned.
Like Nietzsche saying, God is dead.
Yes. Or it relates it to the mythological motif of the hero being swallowed by a sea monster, like Jonah in the belly of the whale. The central organizing principle of the society has been swallowed by the chaos of the unconscious.
The text actually lists a few specific primary archetypes that always inevitably emerge from this data, whether you are reading ancient Sumerian clay tablets or analyzing the parameters of a modern AI.
Let's hear them.
There is the Dragon of Chaos, which represents the unformed, terrifying potential we talked about. There is the Great Mother, representing raw nature, fertility, and creation, but also the suffocating, devouring overprotection that prevents a child from growing up.
Right.
There is the Great Father, representing structure, tradition, the safety of the garden walls, but also the potential for rigid tyranny and oppression. And finally, there is the Hero.
The hero is the active world-generating process of subduing and naming. It is the spirit of Adam in the garden. It is the individual who voluntarily steps outside the safety of the walls, confronts the dragon of chaos, and extracts something of value to bring back and revitalize the community.
But here is the massive twist in the Genesis narrative. Adam, the naming hero, the guy walking around categorizing everything, is fundamentally incomplete. He's organizing the garage, but God looks at him and says, "It is not good for man to be alone."
He cannot do it alone.
He cannot complete the task of subduing reality by himself. He needs help. He needs Eve.
Yes, and the text dives deeply into the mechanics of the creation of Eve and the profound psychological roles she represents.
Right.
She is famously created from Adam's rib, and the analysis notes a beautiful, long-standing theological observation here. She's deliberately not taken from his head, which would symbolize her ruling over him.
Right, not a boss.
Nor is she taken from his foot, which would symbolize him trampling or dominating her. She's taken directly from his side, representing absolute equality, balance, and partnership.
And she's described in the text with the Hebrew phrase ezer kenegdo. Now, growing up, I always heard this translated as helpmeet or helper, which, let's be honest, sounds kind of subservient.
It does.
Like Adam is the CEO and Eve is the administrative assistant fetching his coffee.
That is a very common mistranslation, or at the very least, an incredibly weak interpretation. The analysis clarifies the true weight of those words. The word ezer is frequently used elsewhere in the Bible to describe God himself.
Wait, really? God is called Ezer?
Yes, it is used when God acts as a rescuer, a savior, or a shield in the middle of a desperate battle. It implies profound strength and strategic, life-saving intervention.
Wow, that's way more intense than helper.
The second word, kenegdo, implies something that is opposing or standing face-to-face against you. So a much more accurate translation of ezer kenegdo is a beneficial adversary or partner in play.
A partner in play. I absolutely love that concept. It's like playing tennis with someone who is exactly your skill level, or maybe even slightly better.
Exactly.
If you play against a toddler, it's boring. If you play against Serena Williams, you get crushed and demoralized. But a partner in play constantly opposes you, hits the ball just past your reach, and forces you to play at the absolute edge of your proximal development.
Yes. They are opposing you, but for your mutual, optimal benefit.
That is the exact dynamic. She forces him to grow. Now, psychologically speaking, the framework makes a profound point about her origin. Remember, Eve comes into existence while Adam is in a deep, divinely induced sleep.
Yes, she comes from the unconscious Adam.
Right. Therefore, she fundamentally represents everything that Adam has not yet categorized. She is everything he has missed in his obsessive, rational naming and ordering of the world.
She is the voice of the marginalized. She speaks for the vulnerable, the anomalous, the weird things that don't quite fit perfectly into Adam's neat, rigid little taxonomic boxes.
Yes. And the analysis takes a controversial step here by tying this ancient archetypal role directly to modern evolutionary biology and the statistical personality differences between the sexes.
It's a bold move.
Across cross-cultural psychological studies, women consistently score higher in trait agreeableness, which is a measure of compassion, empathy, and politeness. They also score higher in negative emotion, or trait anxiety.
Which, if you don't understand the context, sounds like a biological disadvantage. Why would evolution select for higher anxiety and hypercompassion?
I can see someone challenging this, saying, isn't this just mapping outdated biological essentialism onto ancient myths?
It is a totally valid challenge, but the evolutionary psychology rationale provided is deeply compelling. You have to look at the extreme vulnerability of the human infant.
Right.
Human babies are born incredibly premature compared to almost all other mammals.
Yeah.
A foal can run hours after birth. A human infant is entirely helpless for years.
Completely dependent.
The analysis points out that a mother must be biologically hypersensitive to the needs, the subtle threats, and the microscopic distress signals of an infant who cannot articulate what is wrong. Her elevated anxiety is an evolutionary radar system for threat detection.
That makes total sense.
Her extreme compassion is the biological drive to nurture and protect that infant, despite the immense, draining personal cost. The text uses an astonishing biological fact to illustrate this. A nursing mother's body will literally automatically decalcify her own skeleton to ensure there is enough calcium in her breast milk for her baby's developing brain and bones.
Oh my God, that is the intense physical reality of maternal self-sacrifice.
It is incredibly intense. But the framework argues that this hypersensitivity, this beautiful self-sacrificial maternal compassion, is exactly what sets up the tragedy of the fall.
Wait, her compassion causes the fall.
Well, because a core tenet of this psychology is that every virtue, when pushed to an extreme and detached from the broader moral order, mutates into a vice.
Okay, let's unpack that. We arrive at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we meet the serpent.
The serpent is the ultimate anomaly. It is the ultimate marginalized creature in the garden. It is venomous, it is deceptive, and it is a predator. It fundamentally does not belong in the safe, ordered structure of the paradisa.
And here is the analysis of the fall, which is completely different from the simplistic Sunday school version most of us know. It argues that the fall is not just a generic mistake, it is caused by two very distinct, highly gendered types of pride.
Let's start with Eve's role. The analysis argues that Eve's sin is the narcissism of maternal compassion, pathological altruism.
Pathological altruism.
The serpent whispers to her, deceiving her, by essentially saying, God is holding out on you. The rules are arbitrary. You can be the one to determine what is good and evil.
Right.
And Eve's prideful, though seemingly benevolent thought process is, my compassion is so vast, my empathy is so all-encompassing that I can embrace even this venomous, marginalized serpent.
I can fix him.
Exactly. I can incorporate this dangerous anomaly into the safety of the garden and make it good through my love. I don't need to listen to the transcendent, rigid rule of God. My boundless empathy is superior.
I can hear people pushing back on this immediately. Compassion is a vice. That's a really hard pill to swallow. But the logic holds if you look at the extremes. It's the belief that radical inclusion, without any boundaries, without any judgment of character or danger, is the highest moral good.
Yes.
But you can't hug a rattlesnake. If you try to inclusively invite the predatory serpent into the nursery, the baby gets bitten. Her compassion becomes a profoundly destructive force because it arrogantly attempts to override the foundational objective axioms of reality.
Exactly. It is compassion divorced from truth. And then there is Adam's sin.
Oh, Adam.
Adam is the one who is supposed to be guarding the boundaries of the garden. He is supposed to be maintaining the structure. But when Eve brings him the forbidden fruit, he takes it and eats it without a fight.
Why? It's the ultimate hold my beer moment.
That captures the S's perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Adam's sin is the arrogant desire to impress the feminine. The analysis likens his psychological state to the dark triad, personality traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
It explicitly mentions Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. Gast is the hypermasculine, arrogant jerk who thinks he can conquer anything, kill any beast, and ignore any rule just to win Belle's admiration.
Yes.
Adam is essentially looking at Eve and saying, you think you found something outside the rules? Watch me handle it. I am so highly competent, my intellect is so powerful that I can order, categorize, and subdue anything you bring me, even if it explicitly violates the moral order that God established.
Both Adam and Eve are committing what is known as the Luciferian or Faustian temptation.
Which means what?
They are letting their own intellect, their own empathy, and their own egos assume total sovereignty over reality itself. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil represents the foundational axioms of existence, the hard truths you simply have to accept to function in the world.
Right.
Touching it means arrogantly claiming the ability to create your own moral values out of thin air, rather than humbly abiding by the transcendent ones. They are attempting to usurp the role of the creator.
And the immediate result of eating the fruit isn't some godlike enlightenment. They don't suddenly understand the secrets of the cosmos. Instead, it's a sudden, crushing awareness of their own inadequacy. Their eyes are opened, and the very first thing they realize is that they are naked.
Nakedness in this context is a profound, multi-layered psychological symbol. It represents the dawn of human self-consciousness.
Okay.
Suddenly, for the first time, they're acutely aware of their limitations, their physical vulnerability, their impending mortality, and their terrifying separation from the divine order they just rebelled against. They're flooded with neuroticism and self-doubt. They realize they can be hurt, and worse, they realize they can be judged.
And what do you do when you are completely overwhelmed by self-doubt and the knowledge of your own vulnerability? You hide.
You scramble.
The framework brings in the modern psychologist Mark Leary and his concept of impression management. They scramble to sew fig leaves together. They try to manipulate reality. They try to deceive each other, and they try to deceive God to hide their flaws.
They stop engaging with truth and start managing their PR.
Yes. They become obsessed with how they appear rather than fixing their souls.
And that initial deceit immediately metastasizes into deep resentment and the shifting of blame. When God walks through the garden and confronts them, what does Adam do? He does not take responsibility.
Not at all.
He points directly at Eve and says, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." In one breath, he blames his partner, and he blames God for giving him the partner.
And Eve, following suit, blames the serpent.
It's the classic cowardly shifting of the blame. No one wants to hold the bag.
And because of this rupture, this arrogant overreach, and their subsequent refusal to take responsibility for it, God pronounces the punishments. But the analysis frames these punishments not just as arbitrary magical curses from an angry deity, but as the inevitable evolutionary, biological, and psychological consequences of human self-consciousness.
It is a brilliant mapping of biology onto myth. God says the woman will experience intense pain in childbirth. The analysis links this directly to the evolutionary trade-off that made us human.
The bipedal thing.
Yes. The transition to walking upright with a bipedal pelvis, combined with the massive cortical expansion of the infant's skull, the big brain that generates self-consciousness. That biological combination makes human childbirth incredibly painful and dangerous compared to other primates.
Wow.
God then says the husband will rule over her. This is framed as the sociological consequence of that extreme female vulnerability during pregnancy and childrearing, which biologically forced early human females to seek out and rely on status-holding competent males for protection and resources.
And then there's the punishment of toil, work. God says the ground is cursed, and through painful toil, Adam will eat of it all the days of his life.
A curse we all feel on Monday mornings.
Seriously. The framework makes a fascinating connection here. Work is functionally identical to sacrifice. Work is the conscious, agonizing realization that the future exists, and you have to willingly give up the pleasure and comfort of the present moment to ensure you don't starve tomorrow.
Exactly. Animals don't work. They forage instinctively in the present.
Right.
Humans work because our self-consciousness tells us that winter is coming and we are going to die if we don't prepare.
And finally, God performs a profound act of tragic mercy. He replaces their flimsy, inadequate fig leaves with garments made of animal skin. This symbolizes the bloody origin of human culture.
Something had to die.
Something innocent had to die, blood had to be shed to protect humans from the hostile nature they are now painfully aware of. Culture, society, tradition, these are the animal skins that protect our naked vulnerabilities. But they require constant, ongoing sacrifice to maintain.
And then the ultimate barrier falls.
Yeah.
God banishes them from the garden entirely and places cherubim and a terrifying flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way back to the tree of life.
They cannot go back to unconscious innocence. The door is locked.
The flaming sword is a terrifying image, but it is fundamentally a necessary reality. It represents the ultimate, unyielding truth. Nothing unworthy, nothing corrupt can enter paradise.
Why not?
If humans, in their fallen, arrogant, self-deceptive, and blame-shifting state, were allowed to eat from the tree of life and live forever, they would solidify their own corruption eternally. They would trap themselves in a permanent state of suffering. It would literally be hell.
Oh, man. So to return to a state of grace, to re-enter the presence of the divine, the flawed, arrogant, deceitful parts of ourselves must be painfully burned away by the truth.
Yes.
The text makes this incredible, unexpected link between the flaming sword, the modern scientific method, and the ancient concept of prayer. I had never considered the mechanical similarities before.
It's a beautiful parallel.
If you are a scientist and you want to make a genuine breakthrough, you cannot approach the data with arrogance. You cannot force the empirical data to fit your prideful hypotheses. If you do, you fail.
You have to voluntarily submit your intellect to the flaming sword of empirical truth. You have to admit your own profound ignorance.
Right.
Genuine exploratory thinking, whether in a laboratory or in your own soul, requires a state of absolute humility. You have to ask the unknown a question, which, the analysis points out, is structurally identical to a prayer.
A prayer to the unknown.
Exactly. And then you have to patiently, receptively wait for the revelation, the answer, to manifest in your mind. It requires the exact opposite of the Faustian pride that caused the fall in the first place. You must be willing to let your cherished, dead ideas burn away in the fire so that the actual truth can live.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and look back at the massive intellectual journey we have just been on.
It's been quite a ride.
We started in the 9th century BC with Elijah hiding in a cave, realizing that the ultimate guiding force of humanity isn't an external thunderstorm, but the internal, still small voice of the autonomous conscience.
And we looked at how our micro-level goals and our macro-level values literally, biologically filter what our physical eyes perceive in the world around us.
We explored how the opening verses of Genesis map the fundamental structure of consciousness itself, demonstrating how the chaotic void is ordered through action and truthful speech.
We unpacked the mechanics of how modern AI and large language models are mathematically proving the existence of the ancient archetypes buried in our collective unconscious.
And we dug deep into the evolutionary psychology and biology of Adam and Eve. We examine the controversial idea of how unchecked maternal compassion can become a tyrannical vice, and how masculine competence can twist into arrogant, destructive posturing.
We saw how our own inherent pride generates our nakedness, our neurotic self-doubt, and the inescapable necessity of work and sacrifice.
It is a staggeringly comprehensive psychological framework, built entirely out of the careful deconstruction of ancient narratives.
It really changes how you look at the text.
Which brings us right back to tomorrow morning. That alarm clock is going to go off. You are going to open your eyes, stare at the ceiling, and face the tohu vabohu, the chaotic void of your own day. The premise we've unpacked suggests that our modern scientific advancements, the very things we arrogantly think moved us past these ancient myths, actually require the exact same posture of humility, sacrifice, and openness to the still small voice that the ancient prophets practiced.
That is the big takeaway.
So the next time you face a deeply chaotic, messy problem in your life, your career, or your relationships, I want you to ask yourself a question. Are you trying to arrogantly force that problem into order just to feed your own pride, like Adam and Eve grasping at the fruit?
Or are you willing to let the flaming sword of truth burn away your preconceptions, your biases, and your ego so you can actually hear the answer you desperately need?
That is the eternal, terrifying challenge of being human.
It really is.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an absolute privilege to unpack this dense, fascinating architecture with you. Keep wrestling with those big questions. Keep listening closely for that still small voice in the chaos, and we will see you next time.